go about this process, I'm going to step over to my workshop and I'm going to put a drawing on that whiteboard, and I'm going to walk you guys through what the fundamental steps are using that whiteboard. Okay, fundamental steps. Let's talk about the fundamental steps that anybody will have to take when they're getting ready to pull a Subaru motor out of their car. Okay, this is how I like to think about it as far as thinking about the fundamental processes you're going through when you're pulling an engine from a car in a Subaru vehicle. Basically, here's your engine. I've just drawn it as a three-dimensional block. Here's your transmission. Front of the car is on this side, so this is the front of the car, this is the back of the car. What I've thrown up here is basically a few of the fundamental pieces. Basically what's happening is that transmission through the bell housing, which is the front of the transmission face, is bolted to your engine block. And the first step you're going to do is you're going to get access to those bolts, and you're going to have to remove all of the transmission to engine bell housing bolts. And some of those are bolts, and some of those are studs. On Subaru engines, the lower ones are actually going to be studs and nuts. The starter will also be incorporated in those bell housing bolts on Subaru vehicles, and there might be several other brackets. But fundamentally, one of the first steps is always going to be getting access to those bolts and removing all of those bolts or nuts that are connecting the transmission from the engine. And that's what I'm showing over here on the 4 fundamental steps, unbolting the engine and transmission from each other. Okay, the next step, step number 2, remove the lower engine stud nuts. Basically, on all Subaru motors, you're going to have 2 engine mounts. And those engine mounts have little studs that go through your front cross member. And when you're going to pull a Subaru motor, what you need to do is remove that lower nut that's holding that stud through that front cross member. And there's going to be 2 of them, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side. So remove both those nuts so that you can lift the engine and transmission up out of that cross member and slide that stud out of that hole from that cross member. So that's step 2, remove the nuts. Step 3 is going to be lift the engine and transmission as one unit. So basically, when you remove that nut from that engine stud, you're going to see that that stud is sticking through about 1.5 inches. And that length is what you're going to have to lift the engine and transmission as one unit up so that that stud clears the front crossmember hole. And that way, you'll be able to move the engine out of the car. So that's step 3, lift the engine and transmission to clear that crossmember so that that stud can be slid forward. Which takes us to step number 4, separate the engine and the transmission and pull the engine. So basically, once you've lifted the engine and transmission as one unit and you've cleared that stud from the front cross member, you're going to need to support the transmission. Make sure you do that. Don't forget to do that. Support the transmission. That way you can pull the engine away from the transmission, separate them right at the mating surface right there where the bell housing mates to the engine block, at the back of the engine block. You'll pull those apart. That way the engine can be slid away from the transmission and the transmission remains supported, and the engine can slowly be pulled out of the engine bay without damaging the surrounding components. So that's basically it in a nutshell. The 4 fundamental steps to pulling a Subaru motor. You unbolt the engine from the transmission, you remove the lower engine stud nuts, you lift the engine and transmission as one unit to clear the crossmember, you support the transmission, then you separate the engine and transmission from each other. That way you can pull the engine out by itself and then put it on an engine stand and get to work doing whatever repair you need to do to that engine. Okay, now that's going to be the 4 fundamental steps that everybody will have to go through anytime they remove any Subaru motor from their car. Doesn't matter if it's a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder, doesn't matter if it's naturally aspirated or turbocharged. These are the 4 fundamental steps you're going to have to go through. Now for this car, this is a turbocharged 4-cylinder car, this dual overhead cam, and there's going to be some unique steps to that process, like removing the downpipe and other components associated with the turbo system. In the next video, I'll walk through the specific steps I go through as I start to prep this engine for removal. Steps like removing the fuel lines, pulling the radiator and draining all the coolant, taking off the top mount intercooler, removing the downpipe, and things like that. Those are all the detailed step-by-step procedures that I'm going to show you guys in the next video. But for now, I'm going to wrap this video up here. Thank you so much for checking out the video, guys. I'm Luke. This is a Subaru-only show. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section. But for now, I'm out of here. Thanks so much, guys. Later.